You're just a debt I have to pay. Mountain Man told the fat girl, then he paid with his heart. You're just a debt I have to pay. James Bear. McAllister's voice rumbled through the sheriff's office like distant thunder, cold and final. He didn't look at the girl in the corner when he said it. His ice-blue eyes were fixed on Sheriff Thompson, as if Eleanor Morrison were nothing more than a sack of grain stacked by the wall. The girl flinched anyway. Eleanor sat on a wooden chair, hands knotted in her black morning skirt, trying to disappear into the peeling wallpaper. At 24, she carried 200 pounds on her soft frame. Every extra ounce another reason people thought they could speak about her like she wasn't there. Her grandfather's only dressmaker had done her best, but the fabric still pulled at the seams when she shifted. Her golden hair was pinned back in a simple knot, her green eyes raw from days of crying. "Robert saved your life, Bear," Sheriff Thompson said quietly. "You know that. You bled out on his table. He kept you on this earth. This is how he wanted you to repay him." James glanced at Eleanor for the first time, and she felt it like a physical touch. He was huge, the tallest man she'd ever seen, shoulders broad enough to fill the doorway, beard dark and thick, scars slashed across his tanned skin like pale lightning. Everything about him said, danger, solitude, stay away. He looked at her the way a man measured a load. How much weight? How much trouble? "I don't run a charity," he said. "I live in the high country, snow, wolves, no neighbors for 15 miles. I can't be tripping over some soft-town girl who can't climb a hill without wheezing." Eleanor stared at the floor. "You don't have to take me," she whispered. "I can manage. I'll find work." The sheriff's silence was answer enough. The whole town had already rejected her. Too heavy to hire, too plain to marry, too kind to survive in a world that had no patience for softness. Behind the office door, she could still hear the echoes of their voices from that morning. Sell her to a saloon, send her to the mining camp, trade her to a brothel downriver. You're listening to this from somewhere in the world right now, maybe from a warm bed, maybe on a crowded bus. As you imagine this room and this girl, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what would you do if you were standing in front of her? Sheriff Thompson's jaw worked. If you don't take her, Bear, the bank takes the cabin, the vultures take her. That's the truth of it. James exhaled slowly, like a man lifting a boulder. "Fine. She comes with me. She cooks, cleans, does what needs doing. When she can stand on her own feet, the debt's settled." He turned to Eleanor, his gaze hard as rock. "Don't misunderstand. You're not wanted. You're a promise I made to a dying man. Nothing more." The words slid into her chest like a knife, but when he jerked his head toward the door and said, "Let's go," she rose anyway, because there was nowhere else left to go. She followed the mountain man out into the fading autumn light, not knowing that the debt he thought he was paying would soon cost him something he'd sworn never to spend again: his heart. The ride out of town was long, silent, and bitterly cold. Eleanor clutched the rough saddle horn as James guided his massive horse up the winding path that led into the Colorado high country. The higher they climbed, the sharper the wind cut through her thin black dress. She shivered so violently her teeth clicked, but she didn't complain. Complaint, she'd learned, only made people resent her more. James didn't look back at her once. By the time they reached the first ridge, the town was a distant speck. Pine trees thickened along the trail, their branches dripping with early snow. The air tasted wilder here, raw, clean, untamed. Eleanor felt small in a way she'd never known before. James finally spoke when the trail leveled out. "You ride stiff? You ever been on a horse before?" "A few times," Eleanor whispered. "My grandfather took me on short rides, but that was years ago." James grunted, a sound neither approval nor criticism. Just an observation he tucked away. They reached his cabin shortly before dusk. Eleanor expected something crude and half-finished, but the structure surprised her. The logs were solid, expertly fitted, the stone chimney tall and straight. Smoke curled from it in lazy spirals. A lean-to for firewood stood to the left, and a small clearing spread out front where chopped logs were neatly stacked. It looked like a place built by a man who intended to survive anything. James dismounted first, then offered her a gloved hand. She stared at it for a heartbeat, surprised he would bother, but placed her hand in his. He lifted her easily, as if she weighed nothing at all. Her cheeks warmed despite the cold. "Inside," he said. "It'll get dark soon." The cabin's interior was simple but functional. A large stone hearth dominated the main room, with a steady fire throwing warm orange light across the wooden floor. A table and 2 chairs sat to one side, shelves lined with jars of dried meat, beans, flour, and herbs on the other. A narrow doorway led to 2 rooms, James's and a storage space that would now become hers. Eleanor stood awkwardly near the door, her carpet-bag dangling from her hand. "Put your things in there," James said, pointing to the small room. "It's not much, but it'll do until I build you a bed. You'll sleep on a bearskin for now." She peeked inside. The space was cramped, barely wider than the doorway, with crates stacked to the ceiling. But it was sheltered, warmer than the street she'd nearly ended up on. She was grateful. Even if he hadn't offered kindness, he had given her safety. When she returned to the main room, James was already peeling off his coat and hanging it near the fire. "You'll make supper," he said. "There's venison, potatoes, onions, simple stew." Eleanor hesitated. "Grandfather taught me. I can cook well, I promise, but may I ask where things are?" James paused, his gaze flicking over her as if recalculating his assumptions. "Pots are under the counter. Knives there. Water barrels outside. If you need something, ask. Don't start guessing and break something." She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir. I'm not your employer." "What should I call you?" "James or McAllister. Up to you." She chose the safer option. "McAllister." He grunted again. As she began chopping vegetables, James sat at the table sharpening his knife, a long, wicked-looking hunting blade that glinted in the firelight. Eleanor kept her eyes on the cutting board, doing her best not to tremble. "You work hard," he said finally. "That's good. You'll need it up here." "My grandfather always told me that work makes a person worthy." James shook his head once, sharply. "Work doesn't make a person worthy. A person's worthy whether they work or not. Don't let this place or the people in that town convince you otherwise." Eleanor froze, stunned by the unexpected softness in his voice, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Still," he added gruffly, "hard work keeps you alive up here, so don't slack." The stew simmered while the wind howled outside. When Eleanor finally served the bowls, James tasted it silently. She watched him anxiously, hands clenched under the table. "It's good," he said. Relief flooded her chest. "Thank you." They ate in quiet, the fire crackling between them. Later, James stood and stretched, casting a tall shadow across the room. "Your tasks start at dawn. Fire first, then breakfast. After that, cleaning and mending. I'll be hunting most days. You don't leave the cabin alone unless I tell you." "Yes, McAllister." "And Eleanor." She looked up. "Don't mistake this for kindness. I'm paying a debt. When you can stand on your own, you leave. Understand?" Her throat tightened, but she nodded. "I understand." But long after he'd gone to his room and shut the door, Eleanor lay awake on her rough bear skin, staring into the dark. She wondered how a man could be so cold and still say something that made her heart hurt with hope. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn. She slipped from her bearskin bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and crept into the main room. The fire had died to embers. She worked quickly, stacking kindling, coaxing a flame, blowing gently until warmth began to bloom again. By the time James emerged from his room, the fire crackled strong, and a pot of oats simmered over it. He studied her for a moment, expression unreadable beneath his beard. "You woke early. I didn't want you to wake to a cold cabin." James grunted approval. "Good." That one word warmed her more than the fire. He ate quickly, strapped on his gear, and said, "I'll be setting traps today. Could be gone till dusk. Don't go outside unless you have to." Eleanor nodded. "I'll have supper ready when you return." James hesitated. "If you hear wolves, stay close to the cabin. They come down early in winter." He gave one final look around the room, a habitual check, ensuring she hadn't disturbed anything important. Then he left. The door closed behind him with a final thud, leaving Eleanor alone with the crackling fire and the ticking silence. She set to work immediately. The floors were swept, the table scrubbed, laundry washed, and hung to dry. As she moved through the cabin, she noticed small details: a hand-carved wooden spoon, a neatly repaired quilt, books on trapping, and survival lined next to novels by Dickens and Austen, their pages worn gently at the edges. James read Austen? The thought made her smile. At noon, she stepped outside to fetch water. The cold bit instantly into her cheeks, and snowflakes drifted softly from a dull gray sky. The world was quiet, untouched, as if holding its breath. She carried the bucket back inside, but as she set it down, she paused. There, on the table, lay a folded piece of parchment weighed down by a stone. Her heart thudded. She opened it carefully. "Make yourself at home as best as you can. Take what you need from the stores. I'll bring back more wood tonight. J.M. Beneath the initials was an awkward, almost hesitant addition. "You did good work yesterday." Eleanor stared at the words until her eyes blurred. She folded the note with trembling fingers and tucked it into her apron pocket like a precious relic. Hours passed before James returned. By then, the stew simmered thick and fragrant on the stove. Eleanor rushed to open the door for him, but froze when she saw him limping slightly. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he said shortly, "just a scrape." But when he removed his coat, she gasped. Blood stained the sleeve of his shirt. "A scrape?" she whispered. "A wolf got curious. I scared it off." "You didn't scare it," Eleanor said softly. "You fought it." James didn't deny it. He moved toward the wash basin, but Eleanor intercepted him. "Sit. Let me help." He stared at her, torn between pride and exhaustion. Finally, he sat heavily in the chair near the table. Eleanor heated water, tore strips of cloth from an old shirt, and began cleaning the wound. James tensed when her fingers brushed his skin. "You don't have to do that." "You took me into your home," Eleanor said, gently wiping away dried blood. "Let me do something for you." Her touch was careful, warm. James watched her in silence, studying the way her brow furrowed with concentration, the softness of her hands despite years of being told she was clumsy. "You're not squeamish," he remarked. "I've taken care of my grandfather for years. Illness, injuries, everything. This is nothing." James swallowed a wince. "You did right by him." "He was the only one who wanted me," she said, voice trembling slightly. James was quiet for a long moment. "He raised you well." Eleanor's breath hitched. "You don't have to say that." "I don't say things I don't mean." She looked up, startled by the sincerity in his tone. His blue eyes, usually cold and guarded, held something else, a flicker of respect, maybe even admiration. She finished wrapping the wound and sat back. James tested the bandage, flexing his arm. "Good work?" Her smile was small but genuine. "Thank you." The tension in the cabin shifted that night, not gone, but softened. At dinner, James ate slowly, savoring the stew. Eleanor watched him nervously until he finally spoke. "You season it well." "I'm glad you like it." "It's better than mine," he admitted grudgingly. Her eyes widened. "Truly? Don't let it go to your head." She laughed quietly. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh. His fork paused mid-air as he glanced at her. "You should do that more," he said before he could stop himself. "What?" "Laugh." Eleanor blushed. "People say my laugh sounds silly." "People say a lot of foolish things." His voice was low. "Don't listen to them." The fire crackled. The wind howled softly outside, and for the first time since arriving, Eleanor felt something new settle in her chest. Comfort. Later that night, as James checked the doors and banked the fire, Eleanor stood awkwardly in her small doorway. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For letting me stay." James didn't look up. "It's not charity. It's a debt." She nodded, biting her lip. "Even so." "Thank you." James paused, his hand resting on the mantel. His voice dropped to a rough whisper, almost too soft to hear. "You're doing fine here, Eleanor." She carried those words into her tiny room like a fragile ember, something she could warm her heart with when doubt crept in. And outside, the mountains held their breath as something neither of them dared name quietly took root. Winter settled over the mountains with a quiet, relentless certainty. Snow deepened along the ridges, draped the pines in white, and wrapped the world in a hush so complete that Eleanor sometimes found herself holding her breath, enchanted by the stillness. Life became a rhythm, slow, steady, intimate, and without either of them meaning to, the cabin shifted from a place of obligation to a place of belonging. Each morning began the same way, Eleanor rising before dawn, coaxing the fire awake, and preparing breakfast. At first, she was terrified she would disturb James, but over the weeks she learned the sound of his footsteps, the heavy tread of a man whose body had endured both wilderness and sorrow. He always emerged the same way, silent, stoic, watchful, but he no longer looked at her like an unwelcome burden. On the 8th morning of heavy snow, Eleanor cracked eggs into a pan and added bits of salted beef, letting the aroma drift across the room. James stepped out of his bedroom, hair tousled, beard uncombed, and for a strange, breath-stealing moment he looked almost gentle. "You made breakfast?" he said, the barest hint of surprise in his voice. "I made enough for both of us," she answered softly. "There's coffee, too?" James sat at the table and watched her cook. At first, the scrutiny made her uneasy, but eventually she realized it wasn't suspicion. It was curiosity. She moved with a quiet confidence now, rinsing plates, turning the eggs with ease, humming under her breath. Every day James discovered some new small thing about her. "You hum when you cook," he said once, startling her. "Oh, I didn't realize." "It's fine. It's pleasant." The admission stunned her more than if he'd shouted. They ate together in the warm glow of the fire. When she served him first, he frowned. "You eat before me." Eleanor blinked. "What?" "You heard me. You've been giving me the first portion every meal. That's not how it works here." "I didn't want to take too much." "You don't take too much," he said sharply. Then softer, "Sit. Eat." Her hand trembled as she lowered herself into the chair. No one besides her grandfather had ever insisted she eat first. And James noticed. Later that afternoon, James returned from cutting firewood to find Eleanor outside, struggling with a frozen bucket. Her boots slipped on the packed snow, and she clutched the handle with reddened hands, breath puffing out in frantic clouds. "What are you doing?" he barked, striding toward her. I needed to fetch water." "In this cold? Alone?" He grabbed the bucket from her grasp and set it aside. "You could have fallen, or wolves could have come down." Her eyes dropped. "I'm sorry. I was trying to help." He stepped closer, his anger shifting into something heavier. "Eleanor." Her name in his voice was low, grounding. "I said don't go far. I told you to call me if you needed help." "I didn't want to bother you." "You are not a bother," he said, the words rough and unpolished. "You're not here to break your back doing every chore alone. We divide the work. Understand?" She nodded, cheeks burning. No one had ever spoken to her like that. With frustration, yes, but frustration born from concern. Over time, James involved her in his daily tasks. Some she could do easily, others she had to learn from scratch. He taught her how to cut kindling. Her first swing barely dented the log, earning one raised brow from him, followed by endless practicing, until she split her first clean piece. He surprised her then, grinning, not mocking, proud. "Good." Again. She felt that smile in her chest the rest of the day. On certain evenings, when the wind shrieked like a living thing and snow rattled against the shutters, they worked side by side near the fire. James repaired tools with steady hands while Eleanor mended shirts, her needle flashing silver in the lamplight. "These stitches are strong," he said once, running his finger along the seam she'd sewn. "My grandfather taught me." "Well, you're doing better than I've ever managed." She laughed softly. "You hunt bears but can't sew?" He shrugged. "We can't be good at everything." A comfortable silence followed, broken only by the crack of burning wood. Slowly, Eleanor realized James wasn't just tolerating her presence, he was adjusting his life around it. He set aside the chair closest to the fire for her. He began leaving extra pelts near her room so she'd stay warm at night. And when he boiled tea in the evenings, he always poured her cup first. He didn't speak affection, not directly, but he did affection. And every small gesture curled deep into her heart. One night, as the fire glowed low and the cabin settled into a soft hush, James pulled a worn book from the shelf. Eleanor recognized the faded title on the spine, Pride and Prejudice. "Have you read it?" he asked. Her breath hitched. "Yes, I love that story." James nodded, flipping the book open. "Catherine, my wife, she read this to me every winter." Eleanor's hand stilled in her lap. "I'm sorry." she whispered. James shook his head. It's not your burden to carry, but I think she'd like that someone else was here now, someone who— He trailed off, jaw tightening. Someone who brings life back to the cabin. Eleanor's heart clenched. I'm not trying to replace her. I know, he said quietly. You aren't, but the cabin was too silent for too long. It feels different with you here. Her breath caught. She didn't trust herself to speak. When she finally rose to retire, James stopped her with a single question. Are you warm enough in that room? He asked gruffly. Yes, McAllister. If you're not, he added, avoiding her gaze, you tell me. I'll move my bedroll to the main room and give you my room. It's warmer. Her eyes widened. I could never ask that. You don't ask, he said. You tell me. Understood? She nodded, overwhelmed by a tenderness he didn't know how to hide anymore. But the moment that shook her most happened on a stormy night when the roof leaked a thin, icy line of water down the cabin's inner wall. Eleanor jumped to place a pot beneath it, but James was already climbing the ladder to patch the roof despite the raging wind. You'll freeze, she shouted. I've worked in worse. He returned soaked, shivering, snow crusting his hair, but triumphant. Eleanor pushed a dry blanket onto his shoulders, fussing when he didn't move quickly enough. That's enough, he said, but not sharply, more like he didn't know what to do with the warmth she offered. Sit, she insisted, pushing a warm mug into his hands. Her voice was firm, steady, in a way she rarely dared. Please. James sank into the chair by the fire, blanket wrapped around him, steam rising slowly from the mug as heat seeped back into his body. Eleanor knelt beside him, closer than she had ever dared to be, watching his breathing calm. Her hand hovered just for a moment, before settling gently on his arm. He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his eyes softened enough that she felt it ripple through the room. Perhaps, she thought, he was starting to see her, not as a burden, not as a debt, as something, someone else. Winter pressed deeper into the mountains, swallowing the trails and drifts so high even James's powerful stride sank to his knees. The cabin, once cold and impersonal, had grown into a sanctuary, yet beneath the warmth of shared meals, quiet laughter, and long evenings by the fire, something darker churned, unspoken histories, simmering tensions, and dangers neither of them could ignore. It began with a letter. James had gone to the creek to check his traps while Eleanor scrubbed the kitchen floor. She hummed as she worked, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tied loosely with a strip of worn cotton. Her humming stopped only when she heard the steady crunch of James's boots returning through the snow. But he didn't walk normally. His steps were slow, heavy. When he entered the cabin, she saw blood on his sleeve, not his blood, but splattered across the folded envelope in his hand. Her breath caught. Are you hurt? No, he said, voice flat. This ain't my blood. He tossed the envelope onto the table. The paper was torn, stained, and half frozen. The handwriting was cramped and angular, a style Eleanor recognized immediately. It's from my grandfather, she whispered. James nodded. Delivered by a trapper from town. Said the letter had been sitting with the sheriff for weeks. He didn't think it mattered much until he heard you were with me. Eleanor reached for it with trembling hands, unfolding the wrinkled page. The ink was faded, but her grandfather's words still cut through time with terrible clarity. Ellie, if you are reading this, I am gone, and that means they will come for you. The deed is hidden where I told you long ago. Do not let Warren or Sheriff Harlow get their hands on it. They will try. Trust no one but James McAllister. He is the only man I would stake my blood on to keep you safe. Grandpa. The letter slipped from her fingers. I don't understand. Sheriff Harlow? Grandpa always said he was kind. James's jaw flexed. He ain't. He's wanted your grandfather's land for years. Railroad surveyors came through last spring, mumbled something about building a rail line through the valley. Anyone sitting on valuable land becomes a target. Eleanor shook her head slowly. I thought the land was worthless, a rocky hillside and a broken cabin. That hillside sits on a water source. Railroad needs water to run their lines. Your land's worth more than gold to them. The reality hit her all at once. My God, they didn't just hate me. They wanted the land. That's why no one helped me after Grandpa died. That's why the bank seized the cabin so fast. James nodded grimly. And that's why your grandfather tried to send you to me. She sank onto a chair, hands shaking. James, what do we do? We protect you, he said firmly, but that means you need to tell me everything your grandfather ever told you, especially about that deed. Eleanor swallowed hard. I don't remember much. I was 12. Grandfather took me to the hillside once, showed me where he buried a tin box. He said not to dig it up unless someone tried to take our home. Someone is trying now, James said, and they know you're alive. How? Eleanor whispered. James's eyes hardened. Because rumors travel fast. Wolcott passed through last week. You met him at the trading post. He saw you with me. He barely spoke to me. He spoke enough, James said. The wrong ears heard. Silence settled over them, deep and heavy. Eleanor felt something cold slide down her spine, a fear not of the wilderness, but of men in power, men who would not hesitate to hurt her to get what they wanted. James, she whispered, what if they come here? They will, he said without hesitation, but they won't take you. That certainty should have comforted her. Instead, it rattled her, because James's voice carried something fierce and dangerous, something he'd kept buried since the death of his wife. She stood slowly and moved toward him, her eyes filled with worry. You're not alone anymore. Remember that. His gaze softened, only slightly. I know. But the truth was, danger had already begun knocking. 2 days later, a shadow fell across the cabin door. Eleanor froze at the sound of unfamiliar voices. James stepped in front of her instinctively, his rifle already raised. Stay behind me, he murmured. 3 men stood outside, Deputy Warren, a railroad man with a polished badge, and a stranger in a long coat whose eyes gleamed with calculation. Afternoon, McAllister, Warren called. We've heard you're harboring Eleanor Morrison. James didn't lower his rifle. Harboring? That ain't the word I'd use. She lives here. The railroad man stepped forward. We're here to settle a matter of property. Miss Morrison's grandfather owed debts to the county. His land is under review for seizure. No, it ain't, James said sharply. Not until the deed's found. The stranger smiled thinly. That's why we're here. We assume the girl knows where it is. Eleanor felt her pulse spike. James sensed it instantly. You assume wrong, he said. Warren's expression tightened. You'll let us speak to her. It's the law. No, James said. It's intimidation. You stand in the way of an official inquiry. I stand in the way of you threatening a woman who's done nothing wrong. A long, brittle pause stretched between them. The stranger spoke again, voice cool as the snow around them. "Mr. McAllister, you're interfering in matters beyond your understanding. Let the girl come with us." Eleanor inhaled sharply. James lowered his voice to a deadly calm. "She's not leaving with you. You boys know where the trail is. Use it." Warren's jaw clenched. "This isn't over, McAllister." The three men left, but not before the stranger turned back, eyes cold and calculating. "Next time, we won't come politely." The moment they were gone, James shut the door and barred it. His body remained tense, coiled like a wolf ready to defend its den. "They'll come back," he said. Eleanor nodded. "I know." He turned to her then, fully, completely. Whatever walls he still carried began to crack. "Ellie," he said quietly, "your grandfather didn't just leave me a debt. He left me a purpose. Protecting you isn't a burden. It's the first thing that's made sense in a long time." Her breath caught. He had never spoken this openly before, never let his voice soften like this. Before she could speak, James reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted the scars on his hands. "We'll face this," he said, "together." Eleanor leaned into his touch, not as a burden, not as a debt, as something far more dangerous, something like the beginning of love. Snow muted every sound that evening, as if the mountains themselves held their breath. James had double-bolted the door, set fresh logs in the fire, and checked every rifle and revolver in the cabin with the quiet focus of a man preparing for war. Eleanor watched him from across the room, her hands curled against her skirt. "James, you think they'll come tonight?" He didn't look up as he tightened a strap on his rifle. "If they're smart, they'll wait until dawn." He paused. "But they're desperate. Desperate men make stupid choices." His words hung in the air like frost. Eleanor moved closer. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? About the land? About the danger?" He finally raised his gaze to hers, and there was no hardness in him now, only a sorrow that made her chest ache. "Because I didn't want you frightened, and because I thought, wrongly, that if I kept you separate from my world, you'd be safe." Eleanor shook her head. "I'm not fragile, James." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment the storm raging outside seemed quieter than the storm behind his eyes. "No," he said softly, "you're not." The knock came just after midnight. Not the hesitant rap of a traveler seeking shelter, the heavy, deliberate pounding of men who came to take. James's expression changed. Calm sharpened into something lethal. He motioned to Eleanor. "Behind me." Her heart hammered as she stepped back. The pounding grew louder. "McAllister!" Warren's voice boomed through the door. "Open up. We know she's in there. Bring Eleanor out, and there won't be trouble." James didn't reply. Another voice rose, smooth, cold, unmistakably the stranger's. "The girl comes with us. We'll search the property at first light. Cooperate now, and we do this civilly." James walked to the door with slow, measured steps. His voice was steel. "You ain't stepping foot inside this cabin." Warren growled. "Then we'll break the door down." James cocked his rifle. The click echoed like thunder. "Try." Silence fell outside. Then the crunch of boots moving across snow, multiple men spreading out. Eleanor felt sick. They brought more. "Of course they did," James said. "They're cowards." He grabbed a second rifle and pushed it gently into her hands. "If they get inside, you shoot. Don't hesitate." She shook her head wildly. "James, Ellie." His fingers brushed her cheek, steadying her, grounding her. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. You can do this." Before she could respond, the window on the left side of the cabin shattered. Gunfire exploded through the silence, wood splintering, glass raining down. Eleanor dropped to the floor as James fired back with brutal precision, forcing the attackers to scatter. Outside, Warren shouted, "We don't want McAllister! We want the girl!" Something inside Eleanor snapped. All her life people had spoken about her, mocked her, dismissed her, treated her like she was less valuable, less worthy, less human. But here was a man willing to die for her, and she refused to let him stand alone. Before fear could silence her, she stood up behind James. "You want me?" she shouted toward the broken window. "Then come say it to my face." "Ellie," James turned, horror in his eyes, but she wasn't finished. "You men talk about justice," she called out, voice shaking but loud enough to reach them. "But you're nothing but thieves. My grandfather trusted this land to me. I didn't take a thing from any of you, and I won't let you take my life or the life of the man protecting me." A stunned quiet washed over the mountainside. Even James looked at her differently, like she had transformed before his eyes. The stranger's voice broke the silence. "Bold words, Miss Morrison, but you misunderstand. This isn't personal. It's business." "No," Eleanor said. "It's greed, and I won't be afraid of men like you." The stranger laughed softly. "Then you'll die brave." He signaled his men. But James saw the shift. He grabbed Eleanor, pulling her to the ground just as bullets ripped through the front wall. Snow gusted in through the broken window. The fire hissed as cold wind hit it. Then James's voice growled right beside her ear, low and fierce, "Stay down." He moved with predator's precision, firing, shifting, firing again. 2 men fell. Warren screamed as a bullet tore through his leg. The stranger cursed. "Fall back!" Eleanor rose just enough to see them retreating toward the tree line, dragging their wounded. James kept his rifle trained on the darkness. "Go on. Run back to whatever hole you crawled out of." For several long seconds, nothing but the winter wind answered. Then silence. Real silence. Eleanor sank to her knees, shaking uncontrollably. James dropped beside her, pulling her into his arms. "You did it," he whispered. "You stood your ground." "I've never been so terrified," she admitted, voice breaking. "But you didn't run," James said. "You faced them. With me." She looked up at him, breath catching at how close he was, snow clinging to his hair, firelight reflecting in his eyes, raw emotion softening every hard line of his face. "James," she whispered, "I stood with you because I love you. You're not a debt. You're my home." He cupped her face in both hands. "And you're mine." He kissed her then, not gently, not cautiously, but like a man who had finally stopped running from his own heart. Outside, the mountains lay silent again. Inside, the cabin glowed with the first undeniable spark of a love forged under fire. The cabin was half broken, glass scattered across the floor, bullet holes in the walls, snow drifting through the cracked window frame. But in the blue hush before dawn, it felt strangely peaceful, as if the storm outside and the violence of the night had washed the world clean. James moved slowly through the room, checking the barricade one last time, though he already knew the truth. The attackers were gone. Men like Warren didn't stick around after meeting a fight they couldn't win. Eleanor knelt beside the hearth, coaxing a new flame to life. Her hands still trembled, but her movements were steady, practiced, capable. The same hands that had stitched his wounded arm a month earlier, the same hands that had stood firm on a rifle, refusing to let anyone decide her fate again. James watched her quietly, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe. The firelight painted her cheeks gold, softening her features, making her look almost ethereal. "You're hurt," she said without turning. "Let me see." He blinked. "I'm fine." "James," she said softly, "please." It was the way she said his name, steady, gentle, certain, that undid him. He sat at the table, and she knelt beside him, peeling back the torn fabric at his shoulder. Her fingers brushed his skin, careful, but warm. He hissed at the sting, but she didn't flinch. "You fought for me," Eleanor murmured. "You nearly died for me." James studied her face. "I'd do it again, 100 times. She stopped, breath catching in her throat. Why? He couldn't lie to her, not anymore. "Because you mattered to me, more than anything has in 8 years. He swallowed. "When Catherine died, I thought my heart died with her. But then you walked into my life, scared, stubborn, trying to be invisible, and somehow His voice cracked. "I found myself wanting to live again." Eleanor's eyes filled. "You don't owe me anything, James. Not love, not protection, not—" "I know I don't owe you," he said, leaning forward, his forehead brushing hers. "I want you. I want you here. I want you safe. I want you beside me." A tear slid down her cheek. "Even though I'm not what people expect? Even though I'm not small or delicate or—" "You are exactly enough," he said. "You are strength and warmth and courage. You faced down a gang of armed men tonight. Do you understand what kind of heart that takes?" She shook her head, overwhelmed. "I was terrified." "So was I," he whispered. "Terrified of losing you." Eleanor pressed her cheek to his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. His arms came around her, holding her close, firm but gentle, like someone who had been broken before and had finally found something he didn't dare lose. The fire cracked softly beside them, sending warm light dancing across the room. After a long moment, James exhaled, voice hushed. "Eleanor, you don't have to decide anything tonight. But if you want to stay, not because of duty or debt, but because you choose to, I'll rebuild this cabin stronger than before. I'll keep you safe. I'll stand with you against whatever comes." Eleanor lifted her head, tears glimmering. "Are you asking me to build a life with you?" He brushed his thumb across her cheek. "I'm asking if you'll let this be home." The silence that followed was soft, fragile, full of possibilities. Eleanor looked toward the window, snow falling gently, covering the scars of the night. She looked back at James, the man who had fought for her, believed in her, offered her something she'd never been given before: choice, hope, love that didn't demand she shrink or hide. Her voice trembled. "I want to stay. I want to try. But, James?" "Yes?" Her eyes held his. "Do you think love like this can survive everything waiting outside these mountains?" James didn't answer immediately. He cupped her face in both hands, kissed her with quiet conviction, and murmured against her lips, "We'll find out together. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. Every time I read your comments, I'm reminded that stories can bridge distances, soften hearts, and make strangers feel a little less alone in this wide world. If this tale found you tonight, whether you're listening from a busy city or a quiet corner of the countryside, I hope it brought you warmth, hope, and a reminder that love can grow in the most unlikely places. Tell me, Where are you listening from right now? And if you still believe in love, stay close, because the next story is waiting for you.